The street was alive with noise and motion. Luxury cars rolled slowly along the polished road, their shiny surfaces reflecting the bright afternoon sun. Expensive shops lined both sides of the street, their glass windows displaying designer clothes, watches, and jewelry. People walked quickly, dressed in neat suits and stylish outfits, talking on phones or rushing toward their next meeting. Everything about this place spoke of wealth, speed, and power. But not everyone belonged here. Near the corner of a large clothing store stood a young girl, no older than 12. Her dress was old and slightly torn, her shoes worn thin from long days on the street. In her small hands, she held a bunch of fresh flowers, simple but carefully arranged. She moved from person to person, offering them with a quiet hope in her eyes. Some ignored her. Some waved her away. A few dropped coins without even looking at her face. Still, she didn't stop. There was a quiet dignity in the way she stood, as if she refused to let the world fully break her. Her eyes carried tiredness, but also a small spark of hope. At that same moment, a black luxury car pulled up by the sidewalk. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was dressed in elegance, her outfit perfectly pressed, her heels sharp against the pavement, her sunglasses dark and expensive. Her posture was straight, confident. Everything about her showed control and authority. People nearby slowed down, some even turning to look at her. She was used to being noticed. Her face, however, held no warmth. Her expression was cold, her lips tight with impatience, as if the world around her was always too slow, too messy, too imperfect. She began walking quickly toward one of the high-end stores, her assistant following closely behind. At the same time, the street girl saw her. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was desperation. The girl stepped forward, holding out her flowers with both hands. She didn't rush. She didn't beg loudly. She simply moved closer, hoping this time would be different. But in that single moment, everything went wrong. As the girl stepped forward, someone from the crowd brushed past her shoulder. She lost her balance slightly and stumbled forward, and collided gently with the rich woman. A soft gasp escaped the girl's lips. A small stain appeared on the woman's expensive dress where the flowers pressed against it. Time seemed to freeze. The rich woman slowly looked down at the mark, then at the girl. Her face hardened instantly. "What have you done?" her eyes seemed to say, even before her voice followed. The girl stepped back quickly, her hand shaking. The flowers trembled in her grip. She tried to explain, her lips moving, her voice soft and broken, but no one really heard her. The rich woman's anger rose fast, like a sudden storm. Her calm, controlled image cracked, revealing something sharper underneath. Without warning, she raised her hand and slapped the girl across the face. The sound cut through the noise of the street. Sharp, loud, unforgiving. The flowers fell from the girl's hands, scattering across the ground. The crowd stopped. People turned. Some gasped. Some whispered. Some simply watched in silence. But no one stepped forward. The girl stood frozen. Her face slowly turned to the side from the impact. A red mark began to form on her cheek. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry out loud. She didn't fight back. She didn't speak. She just stood there, holding her pain inside, as if she had learned long ago that the world did not listen to girls like her. Tears slipped down her face quietly. The rich woman adjusted her sleeve, as if nothing important had happened. Her expression returned to cold indifference. To her, it was a small inconvenience, already forgotten. She turned and walked away. Her heels clicked against the pavement, steady and proud. The crowd slowly returned to its movement, the moment fading like it never mattered. But it did. Because across the street, standing near a parked car, someone had seen everything. A man. Well-dressed. Calm. Silent. His eyes were fixed on the girl, and then on the woman walking away. There was no anger on his face, only something deeper, something thoughtful, something dangerous. He didn't move right away, but the way he watched made it clear. This moment was not over. Across the street, the noise slowly returned. Cars moved again. People continued walking. Conversations picked up as if nothing had happened. The moment faded for most. But not for him. The man stood still beside a sleek black car, his hands resting calmly in his coat pockets. He was dressed simply, but everything about him spoke of quiet power. His clothes were neat, his posture straight, his presence steady. He did not need attention, yet somehow he commanded it. His eyes had not moved. They were fixed on the young girl. She was still standing where it had happened, her face turned slightly, her cheek marked by the slap. She bent down slowly, her small hands trembling as she picked up the fallen flowers one by one. Some were crushed. Some were dirty. But she still gathered them carefully, as if they still held value. The man's jaw tightened slightly. Then his gaze shifted. He looked toward the rich woman, now walking away without a second glance. Her steps were confident, her head held high, her world untouched by what she had just done. 2 lives. 2 worlds. Standing only a few feet apart, yet miles away from each other. The man took a slow breath. There was no anger in his face. No loud reaction. But something deeper moved behind his eyes, something heavy, something thoughtful. He had seen many things in life. Power. Money. Influence. But moments like this, moments of quiet cruelty, they stayed with him. He looked back at the girl again. There was something about her. She did not shout. She did not beg for sympathy. She did not chase after the woman or demand justice. She simply endured. Her pain was silent. And that silence spoke louder than anything else. The man's fingers curled slightly in his pocket. For a brief moment, it seemed like he might step forward. Like he might walk across the street, say something, do something. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he watched. Carefully. Patiently. As if he understood that some moments were not meant to be interrupted, but remembered. A few seconds later, a man in a suit approached him from behind. He leaned slightly closer, speaking in a low voice. The well-dressed man did not turn around. His eyes were still on the street girl. After a short pause, he spoke quietly. His voice was calm, controlled, but firm. He gave a few simple instructions. Nothing loud. Nothing dramatic. But the tone left no room for doubt. The assistant nodded quickly and stepped away, already pulling out his phone as he walked. The man finally moved. Not toward the girl. Not toward the woman. But toward his car. He opened the door slowly, then paused for a second before getting inside. His eyes lifted one last time, looking through the window. The girl had finished picking up her flowers. She stood up again, wiping her tears quickly, as if she didn't want anyone to see her weakness. And then, she stepped back into the crowd. Back into the same world that had just hurt her. The man watched this quietly. There was a faint change in his expression now. Not pity. Not anger. Something else. A decision. He closed the car door. The engine started softly. As the car pulled away from the curb, his phone rang. He answered without hesitation. His voice was low, steady, and clear. Every word he spoke carried purpose. This was no longer just a moment he had witnessed. It was something he had chosen to act on. And somewhere deep beneath his calm exterior, one truth had already taken shape. What happened on that street would not be forgotten. And very soon. It would not go unanswered. As the crowd swallowed her again, the young girl walked slowly down the street, her head slightly lowered, her hands still holding the flowers she had managed to save. The noise around her felt distant now. The laughter, the car horns, the voices, it all blurred together. But one thing stayed clear in her mind. The sound of the slap. It echoed inside her, over and over again. She blinked quickly, trying to push the memory away. Her cheek still burned, but she didn't touch it. It wasn't new to her. The pain, the humiliation. Life had taught her to carry such things quietly. She turned into a narrow alley, far from the shining shops and polished roads. Here, the city looked different. The ground was uneven. The walls were cracked. Trash lay in small piles, and the air felt heavier. This was the part of the city people tried not to see. This was where she lived. She walked carefully, stepping around puddles and broken bricks, until she reached a small, worn-out shelter made of old wood and metal sheets. It leaned slightly to one side, as if it could fall apart at any moment. She pushed the door open gently. Inside, it was dim. A thin mattress lay on the floor, and beside it, an old blanket. In one corner, a small pot and a few utensils were placed neatly. Everything was simple. Everything was fragile. On the mattress lay a woman. Her mother. Her face was pale, her breathing slow and uneven. A damp cloth rested on her forehead. The girl's expression changed instantly. The pain from the street disappeared behind something deeper: care, worry, love. She rushed forward and knelt beside her. Her small hands gently adjusted the blanket, making sure her mother was covered. Then she picked up the cloth, dipped it into a bowl of water, and placed it back carefully. Her movements were soft, practiced. This was her daily life. "Amy," she whispered softly, her voice full of concern. The woman stirred slightly but did not wake. The girl sat there for a moment, watching her, making sure she was okay. Then her stomach growled quietly. She hadn't eaten since morning. She glanced toward the small corner where a piece of dry bread sat on a plate. It was not much, but it was all she had. She picked it up, broke it in half, and placed one part back on the plate. The other half she kept. But before eating, she looked back at her mother again. After a small pause, she placed the larger piece beside her mother instead. Then she quietly ate the smaller one. Even hunger had learned to wait in her world. After a while, she reached into her small cloth bag and pulled out something carefully wrapped. It was a small, worn-out book. The edges were torn, the pages slightly dirty, but it was precious to her. She held it gently, almost like it was something alive. This book was her hope, her escape, her dream. She opened it slowly and began to read. The words were simple, but to her, they meant everything. Each page was a step toward a different life, a life where she was not invisible, not unwanted, a life where she could stand with dignity. As she read, her eyes softened. But then, her hand paused. Her thoughts drifted back to the street, to the woman, to the slap. For a moment, her eyes filled with tears again. She touched her cheek lightly this time. It still hurt. Not just the skin, but something deeper inside. She closed the book slowly. There was no anger in her face, no hatred, only a quiet sadness. A question she didn't ask out loud. Why? What had she done wrong? Was being poor a mistake? Was trying to survive something to be punished for? She looked down at the flowers beside her. Some were crushed. Some had lost their petals. But a few were still fresh, still beautiful. She picked one up gently. For a second, she simply looked at it. Then she held it close to her chest. A small, silent promise formed in her heart. She would not break. No matter how the world treated her. No matter how many times she was pushed down. She would stand again. Slowly, she placed the flower inside a book and closed it carefully, as if locking that promise inside. Outside, the sun began to lower. Evening was coming. She stood up, brushing the dust from her dress. Her body felt tired, but her eyes held quiet strength. She looked at her mother one last time, adjusting the blanket again. Then she picked up the remaining flowers. For a brief moment, she hesitated. The memory of the street still fresh. The fear still there. But only for a moment. She took a deep breath and stepped outside again. Back toward the same street. Back toward the same world. This time, not because she had no choice, but because she refused to give up. As she walked, the fading sunlight touched her face, soft and warm. And though her steps were small, they carried something powerful. Strength, hope, and a quiet courage the world had not yet noticed. The black car moved smoothly through the city, leaving behind the noise of the crowded street. Inside, everything was quiet. The rich woman sat in the back seat, her posture straight, her face calm again, as if nothing unusual had happened. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, and her hands rested neatly in her lap. The driver focused on the road. The assistant beside him kept checking messages on his phone. No one spoke. To her, silence was normal. A few minutes later, the car turned through tall iron gates and entered a grand estate. The house stood like a palace, wide, white, and perfect. Large glass windows reflected the evening light. The garden outside was trimmed with care, every plant in its place, every corner clean and controlled. The car stopped. A servant quickly opened the door. The woman stepped out without looking at anyone. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked inside. Everything inside the house was just as perfect. Clean floors, expensive furniture, soft lights, paintings on the walls. But something was missing. Warmth. The house was beautiful, but it did not feel like a home. As she walked through the hallway, The staff greeted her politely. She gave a small nod, nothing more. Her face remained distant, her mind already moving to other things. She entered her room and placed her bag on the table. Only then did she pause. Her eyes dropped to her sleeve. A faint mark was still there, the stain from the flowers. For a second, her expression hardened. The memory of the street returned. The girl. The collision. The slap. But just as quickly as it came, she pushed it away. To her, it was nothing. A small mistake. A careless child. An annoying moment in a busy day. She walked to the mirror and adjusted her outfit, smoothing the fabric with careful hands. People should know their place, she muttered softly, her voice cold. There was no guilt in her tone. No regret. Only irritation. She turned away and picked up her phone, scrolling through messages. Business deals. Meetings. Invitations. Her world was full of power. Full of control. And she liked it that way. Later that evening, she sat at a long dining table. The table was set for many, but only one chair was used. A servant placed food in front of her, fresh, warm, perfectly prepared. She began to eat slowly, without hurry. The room was silent except for the soft sound of cutlery. Across the table, empty chairs stood still, waiting. But no one came. For a brief moment, her eyes lifted. She looked at the empty seats. Something flickered in her expression. A small pause. A quiet space inside her. Then it was gone. She looked back at her plate and continued eating, as if she had trained herself not to feel that emptiness. After dinner, she moved into her office. This was where she felt strongest. Files were stacked neatly. A large desk stood in the center. Screens showed numbers, charts, and reports. This was her empire. Every decision, every deal, it all passed through her. Her phone rang. She answered quickly. Her voice changed instantly, sharp, confident, commanding. She spoke about business, about deadlines, about control. Here, she was not just a woman. She was power. And she protected it fiercely. But even here, something felt off. A small delay in a deal. A missed confirmation. A message that didn't come. She frowned slightly. It was nothing serious. But it was unusual. She made a quick call, her tone firmer this time, asking for updates. Everything, she believed, had to run perfectly. Any small mistake was unacceptable. Hours passed. The night grew deeper. Finally, she stood up and walked toward the large window. Outside, the city lights flickered in the distance. Beautiful. Distant. Untouchable. She crossed her arms and looked out silently. For a moment, her reflection appeared in the glass. Strong. Elegant. Alone. Her mind briefly drifted again, to the street. To the girl. To the slap. But again, she dismissed it. It doesn't matter, she whispered to herself. And she believed it. Because in her world, small people and small moments did not change anything. Or so she thought. Behind her, her phone buzzed again. Another message. Another small issue. She picked it up, her face tightening slightly. Still nothing serious. But something was beginning to shift. She didn't notice it yet. She returned to her desk and continued working, her focus sharp, her control firm. Her life moved forward as usual. Perfect. Planned. Untouched. But far away, beyond her walls and her power. A single moment from the street had already begun to move. Quietly. Slowly. And very soon. It would reach her. The city slept. But not everyone rested. Inside a quiet office high above the streets, the well-dressed man sat alone. The room was large, simple, and calm. Nothing flashy, yet everything carried quiet power. A soft light fell across the desk where a few files were neatly arranged. He stood near the window, looking down at the glowing city below. His face was calm, but his eyes were awake. Thinking. Remembering. The image of the street returned to him again. The girl's trembling hands, the flowers falling, the sound of the slap. His jaw tightened slightly. Then, slowly, he turned. "Start with both of them," he said in a low, steady voice. Across the room, his assistant nodded and stepped forward. Files were opened. Names were spoken. Information began to move. The man did not rush. He did not raise his voice. but every word he gave carried weight. Within hours, quiet investigations began. The rich woman's name opened doors easily. She was powerful, known, respected in business circles. Her company touched many industries. Her image was strong, disciplined, successful, untouchable. But as the reports came in, small cracks appeared. Stories of strict control. Employees who feared her. Partners who worked with her, but did not trust her. Nothing illegal. Nothing loud. But enough to show a pattern. The man listened carefully, saying very little. Then came the second file. The girl. There was almost nothing at first. No records. No clear identity. Just a name used on the street. A location. A fragile life hidden in the shadows of the city. But slowly, more details came. A sick mother. A broken shelter. Days without food. Nights without safety. And still, she worked. Still, she cared. Still, she endured. The man's expression softened, just for a moment. His hand rested lightly on the file. A memory flickered in his mind, faint, distant, but painful. A time long ago. A place where he had once stood, not so different from that girl. Hungry. Ignored. Invisible. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. This time, there was clarity. "Help her," he said quietly. The assistant looked up, waiting for details. "Not charity," the man added. "Give her a chance." And just like that, things began to move. The next morning, the girl woke up to something unusual. A knock on the door. She froze for a moment. No one ever knocked. Carefully, she stepped forward and opened it. Outside stood a woman she had never seen before. Kind eyes. Simple clothes. No judgment. She held a small bag. "For you," the woman said gently. Inside were fresh food, clean clothes, and medicine. The girl's eyes widened in shock. She looked up, confused. "Who sent this?" she asked softly. The woman smiled, but did not answer. "Just take it," she said. And then she left. The girl stood there, holding the bag, her heart beating fast. She didn't understand. But for the first time in a long while, hope knocked on her door. Days passed. More help came. A doctor visited her mother. A small place was offered, safer, cleaner. And then, something even bigger. A chance to study. A small school agreed to take her in. Books were given, including a new one, clean, untouched, full of promise. The girl held it tightly, her hand shaking. Tears filled her eyes. Not from pain this time, but from something she had almost forgotten. Relief. She didn't know who was behind it. She didn't know why, but she whispered a quiet thank you to whoever was listening. Far away, in his office, the man stood by the window again. He said nothing, but he knew. This was only the beginning. At the same time, in another part of the city, something else had begun. The rich woman sat in her office, her expression tight. A deal had been delayed. No clear reason. A partner had suddenly stepped back from a meeting. An invitation to an important event. Cancelled. Small things, but unusual. Her fingers tapped lightly on the desk. Impatience growing. "Fix this," she said sharply to her assistant. Her control was still strong, but something invisible had started to shift. Something she could not see, could not understand. Yet, back in the quiet office, the man picked up another file. His face remained calm, but his actions were precise, measured, intentional. He was not rushing. He was not attacking. He was guiding. 2 lives, moving in different directions. One rising slowly, touched by unseen kindness. One beginning to shake, touched by unseen consequences. And in the middle of it all, a silent force, watching, deciding, reshaping. The city carried on as usual. But behind the scenes, destinies were changing, and neither of them fully knew. This was only the start. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, quietly, life began to change. For the young girl, the world no longer felt as heavy as before. Her mornings were different now. Instead of waking up with hunger and fear, she woke up with purpose. The small, Broken shelter had been replaced with a safer room. It wasn't big, and it wasn't fancy, but it was clean, warm, and peaceful. Her mother's condition had also improved. The medicine helped. The doctor visited regularly. There was still weakness, still pain, but there was also hope now. Real hope. The girl smiled more often. Not loudly. Not freely. But softly, like someone who was still learning how to feel safe. Each day, she held her new books close as she walked to school. Her steps were careful at first, unsure, as if she didn't fully believe this life belonged to her. But little by little, she began to belong. In class, she listened closely. She worked hard. She didn't speak much, but her eyes were always focused, always learning. Her teachers noticed. Her kindness remained the same. Even when she had little before, she shared what she could. And now, even with more, she had not changed. She helped other children. She respected everyone. She stayed humble. At night, she still opened her old book, the worn one she had kept all this time. Inside it, the small flower remained pressed between the pages. A reminder of pain, of strength, of the moment that changed everything. She still didn't know who would help her. But every night, before closing her eyes, she whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Not knowing, someone was listening. Far away, from behind silence. Watching. At the same time, in a world of glass offices and sharp suits, something very different was happening. The rich woman sat at a desk, her expression tighter than usual. Another deal had failed. This time, without warning. She stared at the papers in front of her, her fingers pressing hard against the desk. "This doesn't make sense," she said, her voice cold but strained. Her assistant stood quietly, unsure of what to say. "This was already confirmed," she continued. Everything was in place. But it wasn't. And that wasn't the only problem. Another meeting had been postponed. A longtime partner had stopped returning her calls. Even small things, things that used to run perfectly, were now slipping out of place. Her control was being tested. And she did not like it. She stood up suddenly, pacing the room. "People are becoming careless," she snapped. "Or disloyal." But deep inside, a small doubt began to form. Something she refused to face. Could it be her? No. She pushed the thought away immediately. It had to be others. It always was. Days passed. The problems didn't stop. Instead, they grew. At a high-profile event, whispers followed her. Soft voices. Careful words. But she could feel it. People were watching her differently. Some avoided her. Some smiled, but not sincerely. A quiet distance had begun to form. Rumors spread slowly, but they spread. She's too harsh. Too controlling. Difficult to work with. Nothing loud. Nothing direct. But enough to damage. Enough to isolate. She noticed it. And it angered her. Her reactions became sharper. Her patience shorter. She began blaming her staff more openly. Her voice grew colder. But instead of fixing things, it made them worse. The more she tried to hold control, the more it slipped through her fingers. Meanwhile, the girl stood in front of her class, holding a book. Her hands were steady now. Her voice, though soft, carried confidence. She had learned. She had grown. She was no longer just surviving. She was becoming something more. Something stronger. Back in the shadows of the city, the well-dressed man sat quietly once again. A file rested open in front of him. 2 paths. 2 lives. Moving in opposite directions. He said nothing. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply watched. Carefully. Making sure nothing was forced. Nothing was rushed. Because this was not about revenge. This was about balance. About truth. About consequences that came, naturally. The girl's strength was lifting her. The woman's choices were weighing her down. And somewhere between them, justice was unfolding. Slowly. Silently. Unstoppable. The world still moved as usual. People still walked the same streets. Cars still passed by. But beneath it all, a quiet shift had taken place. One life was rising with grace. Another was falling under its own weight. And neither could stop what was coming next. The hall was filled with light. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from above, casting a soft glow over the crowd. Tables were arranged neatly, covered in white cloth, decorated with flowers and candles. Well-dressed guests moved around, their voices low and polite, their smiles practiced. It was one of the biggest charity events of the year. Business leaders, social figures, and powerful names had all gathered under one roof. At the entrance, the rich woman stepped out of her car. She looked as elegant as ever. Her dress was flawless, her posture straight, her face calm. But something was different. Her confidence was still there, but it felt thinner now, more fragile. As she walked inside, a few people greeted her, but not as warmly as before. Some nodded politely. Others simply turned away after a quick glance. She noticed. Of course she did. But she kept walking, her expression unchanged. Inside the hall, her eyes moved across the room, scanning faces, measuring reactions. Then, she froze. Near the center of the hall, standing beside a small group, was a girl. Clean, neatly dressed. Her hair combed, her posture straight. Her face calm, but strong. For a second, the rich woman didn't recognize her. But then, the eyes. The same quiet eyes. The same girl. The street girl. The one she had slapped. A sudden shock passed through her. Her steps slowed. Her breath caught slightly. How is she here? The question echoed in her mind. The girl stood differently now. There was no fear in her. No hesitation. She held herself with dignity, like someone who finally knew her worth. The rich woman stared, unable to look away. Confusion, disbelief, and something else, something deeper. Before she could move closer, a voice filled the room. Calm, strong. Ladies and gentlemen. The crowd turned. At the front of the hall, a man stepped onto the stage. The same man. The observer. But tonight, he was no longer hidden. A screen behind him lit up with his name and achievements. A respected businessman. A powerful figure. A man known for building industries and changing lives. Whispers spread through the room. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone respected him. The rich woman's eyes widened slightly. She had heard of him, worked around his circle, but never stood this close to his presence. He looked across the crowd, his gaze steady, his expression calm. Then, his eyes stopped. On her. For a brief moment, silence filled the space between them. Then he began to speak. This event, he said slowly, is about kindness, about giving, about humanity. The crowd listened closely. But sometimes, he continued, we forget what those words really mean. His voice remained soft, but every word carried weight. A quiet tension began to rise. He stepped down from the stage, walking slowly, not toward the crowd, but toward the girl. Every eye followed him. The girl looked up at him, her expression respectful, but not surprised, as if she already knew. He stopped beside her, then gently turned to face the room. And sometimes, he said, a single moment can reveal everything about who we truly are. The silence deepened. Then, his gaze shifted, directly to the rich woman. Her heart began to beat faster. I was there, he said. The words were simple, but they struck hard. I saw what happened on that street. A wave of shock passed through the room. Whispers rose again, louder this time. The rich woman felt every eye turn toward her. Her throat tightened. Her hands grew cold. For the first time, she had no control. The man continued. I saw a child, trying to survive. His voice softened slightly. And I saw someone with power choose cruelty instead of compassion. The room fell completely silent. No movement. No sound. Only truth, hanging in the air. The rich woman stood frozen. The memory returned fully now. Clear. Sharp. Unavoidable. But this time, she could not push it away. The man stepped closer. Not aggressive. Not angry. But firm. And I chose not to stop it, he said quietly. A pause. Because I wanted to see what would happen next. The words carried meaning deeper than they first seemed. His actions, the changes, the consequences, everything, began to connect. The girl looked down for a moment, her hands gently holding the edge of her dress. The rich woman's breath grew uneven. Her world, her perfect control, was slipping. And now, the truth stood in front of everyone. Exposed. Unavoidable. The man looked around the room one last time. "This," he said, "is not just a story about one moment." His voice steady. "It is about choices, and what follows them." The tension in the room reached its peak. No one spoke. No one moved. Because now, everyone understood. This was not just a revelation. It was the beginning of something much deeper. And for the rich woman, there was no turning away anymore. The silence in the hall felt heavy. No one spoke. No one moved. All eyes were fixed on the rich woman. She stood still, her body tense, her mind racing. The lights above felt too bright now. The room that once felt familiar now felt strange, almost suffocating. The man stepped closer to her. His face was calm. There was no anger in his eyes. But there was something stronger. Disappointment. "You have built a life of success," he said quietly, his voice steady but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Power. Respect. Influence." The woman's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. "And yet," he continued, "in one simple moment, you showed none of it mattered." His words were not loud, but they landed deeply. The woman felt them. Each one. Like a weight pressing against her chest. "You were not tested in business that day," he said. "You were tested in humanity." The room remained silent. "You were given a choice," he added. "And you chose to hurt someone who had nothing." The woman's eyes dropped slowly. For the first time, she could not hold her gaze steady. Her mind replayed the moment again. The girl's trembling hands. The soft voice trying to explain. And her own reaction. Fast. Harsh. Uncontrolled. Her chest tightened. A strange feeling rose inside her. Not anger. Not frustration. Something she had avoided for a long time. Guilt. She swallowed hard. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak. It didn't sound like her. The man did not interrupt. He simply stood there, waiting. Giving her space. Not to defend herself, but to face herself. "You thought it was nothing," he said softly. Her eyes lifted slightly. But to her, it was everything. The words broke something inside her. Her breath became uneven. She looked toward the girl. The same girl she had once seen as small, insignificant. But now, she looked different. Strong. Calm. Dignified. The girl was not angry. She was not crying. She simply stood there, quietly, with a strength that filled the room. And somehow, that made it worse. The woman's hands trembled slightly. For the first time, she felt small. Not because of her status, but because of her actions. The room around her blurred. All the power she once held felt distant now. All the control gone. What remained was truth. Raw. Unfiltered. Unavoidable. Her mind searched for something, an excuse, a reason, someone else to blame. But there was nothing. Only her own reflection. "I didn't think," she whispered, her voice breaking. The man nodded slightly. "That is the problem," he said gently. Another silence followed. This one deeper. More personal. The woman closed her eyes for a moment. And in that moment, everything she had ignored came rushing in. The empty dining table. The distant relationships. The fear in her employee's eyes. The whispers behind her back. The loneliness she had buried under success. And now, the girl. A single moment that revealed it all. A tear slipped down her cheek. She opened her eyes slowly. For the first time, there was no pride in them. No arrogance. Only pain. And truth. She looked at the girl again. Then took a small step forward. The entire room held its breath. This was the moment. The turning point. Would she protect her pride? Or face her mistake? Her voice came out soft. Unsteady. "I was wrong." The words were simple. But they carried everything. The air in the room shifted. Not loudly. But deeply. The girl looked at her. Their eyes met. Two worlds. Two lives. Standing face to face. One shaped by struggle. The other by power. But in this moment, only one thing mattered: truth. The man watched quietly, his expression unchanged, but his eyes softened slightly, because this was what he had been waiting for. Not punishment, not revenge, but realization. The woman lowered her head slightly, not out of weakness, but out of acceptance. And in that small gesture, something began to change, not just in the room, but inside her. The silence slowly eased, but the impact remained, because this moment would not be forgotten, and what came next would decide everything. The silence in the hall slowly softened. People began to breathe again. The tension eased, but the moment still lingered in every heart. The rich woman stood still, her head slightly lowered. For the first time in years, she did not try to control the situation. She accepted it fully. Her eyes lifted again, but now they looked different. The sharpness was gone. The pride had faded. In its place was honesty. She turned toward the girl. Her steps were slow, careful, as if every movement mattered. When she reached her, she paused for a second. The room watched closely. "I can't change what I did," she said softly, "but I want to make it right, if you allow me." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear of people, but from the weight of truth. The girl looked at her quietly. There was no anger in her eyes, only calm, only understanding shaped by pain. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she gave a small nod. Not full forgiveness, but a beginning. Something gentle, something real. The rich woman exhaled slowly, as if a heavy burden had lifted just a little. That night marked a change, not just in words, but in actions. In the days that followed, the rich woman did something she had never done before. She slowed down. She listened. She visited the girl, not as someone powerful, but as someone learning. She saw the small room, the simple life, the quiet strength that had survived without comfort. And it changed her. She made sure the girl's education continued without worry. Not as charity, but as responsibility, as respect. She arranged better care for the girl's mother. And more than anything, she began to change how she treated people. Her staff noticed at first. Her voice softened. Her patience grew. Where there was once fear, there was now space. It was not perfect. Change never is. But it was real. Meanwhile, the girl continued her journey. She studied harder. She smiled more. Her confidence grew with each passing day. The small flower still rested inside her book, but now it was no longer a symbol of pain. It had become a symbol of strength. She was no longer just a girl trying to survive. She was becoming someone with a future, a voice, a place in the world. And though she never forgot the past, it no longer controlled her. Far away, in the quiet of his office, the man stood by the window once again. The city lights stretched endlessly before him. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He had seen enough. The girl was rising. The woman was changing. The balance had been restored. Not through force, not through revenge, but through truth, through consequence, through compassion. He picked up a file from his desk, then closed it gently. Finished. For him, this was never about punishment. It was about reminding people of something simple, that power means nothing without kindness, and actions always return. Back in the hall, the night slowly came to an end. People left with quiet thoughts. Some inspired, some changed, because they had witnessed something rare. Not just a fall, but a transformation. And in that transformation, there was hope. The girl walked forward into her future. The woman stepped back into her life, with new eyes. And the man, he remained in the background, unseen, but never absent. Because sometimes, the greatest changes begin with a single moment, and the courage to face it. The same street stood under the soft light of the afternoon sun. Luxury cars passed by. People walked quickly, just like before. The shops still shined with glass and gold. Everything looked the same. But something had changed. The girl walked along the sidewalk once again. This time, her steps were steady. Her clothes were clean. Her head was held high. In her hands, she still carried flowers, but now, They were not just for survival. They were a choice. Her eyes no longer searched for approval. They carried quiet confidence. A few steps behind, the rich woman stood near the same spot where it had all begun. She watched the girl for a moment. Her face was calm, quieter, softer. No pride, no anger, only understanding. Their eyes met briefly. No words were needed. Just a small nod, a silent respect. The moment passed, but its impact remained. Because one act of cruelty had changed everything. It had broken something, but it had also rebuilt something stronger. And somewhere, unseen in the moving crowd, a quiet watcher stood once more, not interfering, just observing, as life moved forward. Because in the end, kindness is never small, actions are never forgotten, and sometimes, someone is always watching.